Let's start. First of all, welcome everyone. My name is Bashe. It's a privilege to serve as the moderator of this important conversation. Digital health has been on our radar screen for quite some time, but it's clearly one of the most misunderstood sectors of the health economy. Now, if you thought digital health was really in the critical care ward a year or so ago, you're absolutely wrong. The first half of 2024 reinforces that this misunderstood sector may be evolving into an essential partner of the payer, provider, product innovator, patient care effectiveness, and operational efficiency mindset. A few weeks ago, I penned an article in Medical Life on the Galen growth report for the first half of 2024. I was very privileged to receive an embargoed copy of that report. And actually, you can download the report through that article or going right to Galen Growth. I think the report is a must-have and must assess. That article, by the way, allowed us to track every detail and deal of the digital health sector. Now, the report is based upon, and I verified this, it's based upon some 500 million data points across 30,000 sector players. And it provides valuable insights, not only into the ups and downs of the sector itself, but where money is going, why, and where partnerships are being secured, at what level, and by what industry player. Now, my article also suggested that the spike in investment in during the COVID-19 era was just based on pure enthusiasm, exuberance, and it was absent of serious due diligence, and the category would actually rebound. The Galen Growth Report confirms that hypothesis. It underscores the importance of this in-depth study and the understanding of the sector's evolution. I would particularly suggest you look not just at this report, but if you can, and I don't know if that's possible, Sara, to access previous reports from Galen Growth. And if you're serious about the category, if you're in the category, if you're head of a company, a startup, about to make an investment, I would take a look at probably the last 3 years of reports and look at the trend lines. They're illuminating. Now, better than the article that I wrote, and perhaps even better than the Galen Growth Report, are the 4 guests I have on this panel. They're truly global leaders of the category. They cover the category in a very unique way. And I want to introduce them to you and then jump right into some questions. If you have specific questions you'd like to raise also, I'll monitor the chat area and I'll try to represent your voice. First, Gaye, who's a partner, and she's responsible for AI and digital innovation, the Digital Innovation Fund at Mass General Brigham. She has an incredible background. Now, she's come to Mass General Brigham, leading their $30 million AI and digital innovation venture fund, which invests across the stages. It looks at commercial stage companies. I believe, Gaye, you also look at some startups from time to time, but you're really eclectic in your investment strategy and your advice strategy. Now, before joining Mass General Brigham, Gaye was a venture partner in an institutional venture fund, and she was a board member of several of their portfolio companies. She's a seasoned commercial and business development executive whose career spans chemical, genomic, bio-based energy, and bio-based product sectors. She's been on both sides of the table, and she's been responsible, obviously, for representing limited partners when she was at a venture fund, and now she's representing probably one of the nation's great hospital systems. Next is John Nosta. Many people know John. He is more than president of NostaLab, which is a major think tank, a global think tank. John probably is one of the most highly sought after speakers, thinkers, guides in this transformative innovation sector. His welcomed yet provocative thoughts can be found on the digital pages of Psychology Today, Forbes, Fortune, and most certainly on the main stages of industry conferences globally. John's background is rooted in science. He too has a relationship with the Brigham from his earliest days doing science with Eugene Brumwald, the famous cardiologist. And he's sort of expressed that ability through building multi-billion-dollar brands as a creative genius at some of the world's largest medical advertising agencies. What John does best is he opens people's minds to the possibilities. He confronts your status quo and pushes you higher and higher. John, also, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure, Gil.
Sara Schmachtenberg. I always apologize, Sara. Thank you. I appreciate it. I had it right 15 times before this session. I was so proud of myself, and now I need your help once again. Sara is one of the people who's key to this conversation because she actually signs off on the Galen Growth data. She is the head of data and analytics at Galen Growth. Now, she has an incredible analytic foundation. Interestingly enough, like Gaye, like John, her insightful roots are in the Boston area. I don't know what it's about Boston. We're going to ask Gaye at the end of this, why Boston? But I can tell you why Boston. She earned her PhD and master's both at MIT, and she's really applied that analytic skill to looking how at pattern recognition. She looks at data, not at raw data points, but what does it all mean? And that's allowed her to build the data infrastructure at Galen Growth so that those of us who are users of these data can really maximize this and make critical business decisions. Next, it's a pleasure to introduce Lawrence Wurtz. Lawrence is the managing partner, the general manager of Galen Growth in North America. He's responsible on the ground in this part of the world of answering the thousands of questions that come in from people about what does this data mean and where do I go and how do I apply. He's responsible for interfacing across the health ecosystem so that people get access to the data and can apply it in very large business decisions. So I want to thank our panelists for joining us today. Really, thank you from around the world. We have people in Boston, in New Jersey, in Midwest US, and of course, Sara, I believe you're based in Basel, Switzerland. Is that correct?
I am.
I got that right at least. Thank you. All right, let me jump in to my first question. And Gaye, I'm going to turn to you. And then John, listen in because I actually have a twist of this question for you. Gaye, you and Mass General Brigham have a very distinct point of view about making investments in digital health. You're both looking at this from the internal standpoint. How will this investment impact the quality of care, the effectiveness of one of the nation's greatest institutions in medicine? But you're also looking at this in terms of what could we do with this for the rest of the world? So you're looking at this internally and externally. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of the report, a lot of people have been saying to me the last 2 years, digital health really has seen its heyday and is over. Is that your perspective? Do you have a different perspective?
Oh, I think that's not my perspective at all. I think that as you look at any significant technology transformation, it goes in waves, right? And I think that we've seen several waves on the digital health side going back 20 years. And each time you see a peak and then a dip and a peak and a dip. And I think that basically we're shifting from this exuberance to implementation. And so that's sort of the overall perspective of, I think, the difference between 3 years ago and now. I think
that's a very interesting perspective. I'm sorry, did I cut you off? Did you want to ask?
No, that's fine. Just sort of for the audience, we have 2 venture funds here at Mass General Brigham is the largest health system in Massachusetts. We're also the largest recipient of NIH funding. So we do 2 different types of investing here. One venture fund invests in the spin-outs that are coming out of those innovations. And so we're really trying to both move those forward into patient care and also generate revenue to support the mission of our nonprofit health system. And then the fund that I'm the partner on is really trying to leverage our colleagues identifying digital solutions that truly have de-risked their product market fit, because our colleagues who are very very storied in their way that they look at solutions, have decided that they not only do the solutions work, but they also make sense from an economic perspective. So we are, as you said, Gil, we work on both sides, outside in and inside out.
Thank you for that. John, I want to take what Gaye said and put a twist to the question, because you've been talking a tremendous amount. You were one of the early in voices about large language models. And I'm just wondering, to what Gaye said and what people were saying to me about the rise and fall of the digital health category, because they were looking purely at the numbers. They weren't looking at where the investments were going specifically.
Yeah.
They were just saying, oh, investments have dropped. That's a sign that nobody cares. But you were talking very early on about LLMs. And I wanted to get your perspective in terms of where Gaye said, no, not at all. I don't believe in that perspective. I don't prescribe to that perspective that digital health is dormant. I'm wondering if the evolution of the technology itself also breathed new relevance and life into it. What's your perspective?
Yes, and yes, and yes. I think first
Okay,
and
thank you.
foremost,
No.
we live in an interesting context. We live in the world of pharma, whether we like it or not, because pharma has established a methodology where drugs move through a system, become approved. We even have, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Yet oftentimes in the context of digital health, I think it was a much more of an ambiguous dynamic that kind of let us wonder, well, what's next? So, I still believe that when that patient comes to the doctor, comes to the cardiologist with Fitbit data or some genomic data, you don't get a hug, you don't get a nod, you get a shrug of the shoulders, because it has not yet been implemented or accepted into clinical practice in many ways. So for me, that's been the struggle with digital health, that with the exception of maybe AliveCor and Dave Albert's, EKG innovations, the process has been a little sluggish. That's because I didn't know what to do with the data in many instances. For one perspective is that it was a lot. The other one was that I didn't know how to make certain clinical connections. So yes, I do believe that the emergence of advanced analytics beyond the context of AI, which is really sexy but cumbersome. Now we have large language models that are tuned to a frequency that aligns with patient and clinician. So my perspective is that this is the kick in the pants that may offer us to understand the place that digital health lives in the clinical continuum. Because quite frankly, I don't know where I use my AliveCor. I carry my AliveCor EKG machine in my wallet, but I never use it. That's probably because I don't have atrial fibrillation. But if there's some way of getting a connectivity, I guess you can call it an interoperability, if you will, to use that ugly word, in the context of digital health and clinical practice, that I think that we will see a change in the inflection point. So I don't think that digital health is dead by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that there are still obstacles to that for us to manage.
Thank you for that. Now, Sara, you really own the data, and I want to go back a report or two, not to sort of press my luck, because I think you probably memorize all of these reports. So about a year ago, the report really showed a significant decline in investment. This report shows actually a real bump up in investment, particularly in the second quarter of this year. We're seeing a bump up. And I'm wondering if, along the lines of my conversation with Gaye and John, if you could just, in a way, analytically chart the course of, it was like people could not throw enough money into the category. It was like, almost like shovels of money coming in. Every startup venture who said, my cousin had this disease, so I've invented this digital application for people like my cousin, and they were getting enough money to really go into this. So we saw this, and then we saw really right after, I'd say, the 18 months into COVID, we saw a valley, death valley, and now we're seeing something else. You look at not just the category, you look at therapeutic categories, you look at it across elements of the health ecosystem, you look at it across geography, you're looking at 500 million data points. Could you summarize from your perspective as head of analytics what you're seeing in this up and down sort of journey? Because I actually do think, to what Gaye and John just said, that the category is actually reaching now a sense of not necessarily maturity like the pharmaceutical market has, but I think it's reaching this world. I think Gaye used this world of practical application. It's kind of finding its sweet spot. I mean, can you help us out?
Absolutely, Gil. Thanks for having me. And I think you talked about it earlier in your introduction, actually, is that, we saw a lot of excitement and investors throwing the money at everything during COVID, in the 18 months right after the outbreak, right? A lot of reasons for that. I won't get onto all of them now. A lot of them were the economics, right? Investors didn't have anything else to put their money in, so they're now moving into healthcare. This was a shiny star. But absolutely right. That came crashing down because then different things happened with inflation, and then the investors went back to their standard investments. Now what we're seeing is kind of a different era, right? You have the different waves coming in. Now we're really getting into that era of digital health is healthcare, right? John mentioned this is still being owned by pharma. I disagree somewhat. Pharma has a big chunk of healthcare that they own, they run, they coordinate. Absolutely, completely right. But I'm really excited to see Gaye here, because what I really feel like is that health systems are beginning to drive a good portion of the ecosystem, which is a very exciting place to be. They've been building the ecosystem from the ground up for many years now, and they're starting to finally see the fruits of that work, the fruits of that labor, with the investments they've made, the accelerators they've had, the programs to build these small companies up little by little, and finally now they're being able to really reap the benefits.
Yeah. Wait, by the way, just a quick follow on to that. Were health systems really on your analytic radar screen 4 years ago when you were looking at this? I really saw this as more venture capital money and not a lot of health system money 4 years ago. Now I'm seeing the sort of like Mass General Brigham and sort of Gaye's sort of cohort as really almost like the drivers of the category itself. So how about 4 years ago?
Not on the radar. You're absolutely right, Gil. You hit it on the nose. And they get together and they really support each other, support the ventures. It's a fantastic ecosystem.
So Gaye was a pathfinder. Salute to you. Lawrence, I want to ask you a sort of an operational question here. Taking what Sara has shared with us, the report itself, I use this report extensively to give guidance. I use it as a backdrop when I'm doing my own keynote speaking engagements. The data is I just found the depth of data looking at therapeutic categories specifically. I have found it very helpful. I saw, and Sara will correct me if I'm wrong, I saw a drop off in mental health investment about 2 years ago. I see a pop up again in mental health investment again. And I don't want to put you on the spot of why that's happening from a mental health standpoint, but could you speak to us and our audience about just the importance of looking at the data from a therapeutic category standpoint and what we can glean from that, what decisions we should make about that just from the therapeutic category standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, from a therapeutic area standpoint, I see a number of things, just as you were talking about. Mental health is kind of come back on the rise. I think it's in the second place now, and Sara can correct me if I'm wrong on that, in terms of funding and stuff that it's raising. Oncology, I believe, is number one in that area. And I think a lot of that has to do with the advancements, right, that taking a place in the digital health and where some of these ventures are focusing, right? And to add on what Gaye was talking about earlier, in terms of the health systems and what Sara was speaking to, yeah, we've seen, you're asking about them engaging in the ecosystem and them developing it. We've seen the amount of partnerships that health systems are forming with ventures, on the climb. I mean, they counted for, I think, 21% the partnerships with ventures. So it's a very large percent. The second largest was venture to venture partnerships. So, but yeah, as far as the therapeutic areas go, I think we always see, those kind of switch around a little bit, and a lot of that has to do with the type of technology that's out there and what's being developed in the space.
Yeah, I think that really feeds into what Gaye and John were talking about earlier. So let me just return to them for just a second. Gaye, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the decision-making process that you go through. I mean, Mass General Brigham really has one of the among the best reputations in medical care and innovation in this country, if not the world. When people talk about Mass General Brigham, it's obviously tip top. So obviously the heat's on you to make some very wise decisions. John talked about sort of smarter technologies, and Sara and Lawrence have talked a little bit about the therapeutic categories. Without putting you on the spot, or maybe putting you on the spot a little bit, can you talk a little bit to us about the considerations that are going through your head when you're saying, these are the areas we need to deploy our time and resources toward, because this is what our institution and its patients need?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, thanks for the question, Gil. I think that, as I said, our AI fund, we really are investing alongside where our health system has, where our colleagues have said, yes, this product is meeting our needs. And so those needs have evolved over time. I think when I think about digital solutions and AI-based solutions, where we've seen the greatest embrace fastest is on the operations side around efficiencies. I think that our health system's been rightfully so much more cautious about making adoptions that are patient-facing or touch patient care. So that has been a slower to evolve, but is now coming. I wanted to touch on Lawrence's conversation or your conversation with him around behavioral health. And I think one of the trends that we see is when I joined the health system in 2021, if I brought a tech-enabled service opportunity to one of my colleagues for vetting, typically the answer was, why would we subscribe to this solution? This is what we do. And I think in the intervening 4 years, the stresses on providers, the number of providers relative to the need, has become much more challenging. So I think health systems are embracing technology as a way to leverage their clinicians and also as ways to try and reduce burnout amongst clinicians. And one of the areas of greatest need is behavioral health. So for example, it wasn't from my fund, but the other fund here, Mass General Brigham Ventures, seed funded and spun out InStride. And InStride took a world-class adolescent anxiety bricks and mortar capability, and alongside 406 Ventures and a number of institutional investors, we were able to get that out to the world and spread that terrific capability much more broadly to a very underserved population. So that's sort of an example of some of the trends that we see coming out of the health system, and are driven by this sort of shortage, frankly, of clinicians in oncology, in particularly behavioral health, and then the primary care physicians are also under a huge amount of pressure. And so trying to think of ways that that work well with the workflow of the PCP, but also can offload some of the increased care that they need to provide for particularly patients with chronic conditions. I'll stop there.
No, there's a lot to unpack there, Gaye. Thank you so much. The concept of the well-being of the clinician and behavioral health. John, I want to turn to something that you really have been a pioneer at. You talk a lot about the cognitive age that we've entered into this area. And, I think of patients using large language models, LLMs. I think of clinicians using LLMs. I think of what Gaye was talking about, patient behavioral health. burnout on the doctors to make their lives easier. And I've sort of come to realize from my own application of both ChatGPT and LLMs that the tool is only as good as the person who sort of controls the keyboard, and that the ability to frame the intelligent probing question and push and push and push really enables us to maximize the well-being of the tools itself. Now, you've really been talking about this cognitive age. Could you explain that a little bit and talk
Sure.
about how LLMs are both going to, I don't know, I was going to say save the health system, but certainly potentially save people's lives. Could you talk a little bit about those?
I tend to agree with all the comments that have been made. I think that, interestingly, with respect to the alignment of need, that's a phrase that comes up oftentimes, and I think that was one of the missteps in the early days of digital health, that we were putting pulse oximeters in devices that were sexy or interesting, or my cousin's brother thought it was a good idea, but its clinical utility, it didn't align with the need. And that was really a tragic problem. We see a lot of gadgets that have no real functional clinical utility. Now I want to look at that in the context of Henry Ford, because he said something interesting, allegedly, that if I ask my customers what they want, they'd ask for a faster horse. So we have to be very careful about the application of clinical need in the context of what I believe is a new era, the cognitive era. The Industrial Revolution was defined by the mechanical advantage, a gear. You know, the fastest animal, the most efficient animal in the world was the cheetah, until he came along with a bicycle and it became a human. And what we're seeing now is a cognitive advantage. We're changing the way people think by integrating thinking machines into our clinical process, whether that be something as mundane, as simple as asking questions in a physical exam, or crafting a complex differential diagnosis. So I think that it's not as simple as, I have a problem, let's apply AI to the problem. I think we have to look at it from the other way around, actually, that as we sort of push into this cognitive age, we have dynamic, brilliant thinking partners that stumble, that hallucinate, that confabulate in a very similar way to another cognitive construct called the clinician. So that's my perspective. I think we're going to see a twist, a game change in that our thinking partners, called large language models, as they advance quicker and quicker and quicker, and in many instances are surpassing human knowledge and capabilities, that they will become a driver, an impetus for innovation. So it's not just that they're not only aligning with the clinical need, but we're looking at what their level of expertise is and how we can best fit them into the clinical pattern. Makes people nervous, makes doctors nervous.
It does. You know, I'm gonna circle back to you on this in just a bit. I'm gonna jump over to Sara, but something to give you both you and Gaye thought about. You know, we talk about LLMs and hallucination. You know, sort of like the data hallucination and the need to address that. But I wonder, don't doctors come into the conversation with their patients with biases and their own assumptions symptomatically, and aren't those also human hallucinations? So it's a question of who's hallucinating more, and what hallucinations are more dangerous, the LLM's hallucination or the clinician's hallucination? Food for thought. Don't answer.
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in because one of the most famous expressions at Harvard Medical School is that when a Harvard medical student hears hoof prints out the window, the first thing they think of is a zebra. So I think that the whole perspective, and we use that all the time. So
I thought you were going to say Paul Revere. I'm sorry. And also Gaye went to Harvard.
Zebra.
I believe you're insulting her. She didn't think zebras.
No. And I'm not a doctor, just to be clear. I come at this from the business side, and as you covered, but I think that LLMs are a terrific tool. I think that one of the aspects in healthcare and in any sector is, how do you reliably do the right thing, the quality thing, over and over and over again? And cueing people to do that, or to the extent that an AI or a digital solution can do the mundane over and over within the same constraints of quality, I think that there's a real benefit there. And I think it's the question is getting comfortable with the guardrails on the, I don't even like the term hallucination for LLMs. It's too anthropomorphic. I think you just have to go back and understand what it's doing. It's making a probabilistic prediction of what the next response would be. And I think if you hold on to that, you realize that, it's a tool, and the tool has some breadth in terms of how the answers that it's going to surface up. And that's why I think we've got humans in the loop for quite a long time. So I flip it, John, and I think about how, we have this very increasingly rare resource, which is the human clinician, the, human pick your type of service or what you're providing. How do we maximize the use and the best and highest use of that human?
Important
and how can we
question.
offload all the mundane that we
Sure,
possibly
sure,
can
but it's
do?
not just,
John,
it's not just
John,
mundane.
hold that for a second.
It's
Hey,
not
John,
just
you-
mundane,
you-
Gil. Let's go. I'm
You'll
gonna
hold that
push
for
on
one
that.
second.
Yeah.
We'll get to the mundane in a moment. We'll come
Oh.
back to you both. So Sarah, we have a spirited agreement, disagreement going on here, but back to LLMs and the report for a second. I might be mistaken, but 1 year ago, I did not see, to the best of my knowledge, I certainly saw AI reflected in the reports. I did not see LLMs reflected in the the influencing the data. Now I clearly do. Is that true? And if it's either accurate or it was in evolution, how do you reflect on the fact that LLMs embedded into these technologies or these products are actually the AI is sort of augmented implementation as opposed to artificial intelligence now? This whole category is really morphed to something much more valuable.
Absolutely. Gil, I'd like to go back 18 months. 12 was a little bit too close. 18 months ago, the general population had no idea what an LLM was, right?
John did, by the way. John
no
invented
doubt.
the term.
And then John's great for it, but really nobody had an idea what it is. And if we think of the reality now, where we are, LLM ventures using LLM, you're still only talking about 2% of the ecosystem. So what they can and cannot do and how much they're going to influence the ecosystem is really only beginning, right? There's a huge amount of possibility out there. What the physician, how they can benefit from it or how they're threatened by it and all this, it's all right now a bunch of hypotheses because it's just beginning to take hold, right? But the good news is, if we look at AI as a whole, 40% of the ecosystem uses AI. They captured 56% of the funding in the last half year, right? So there is funding going into it. Investors are excited about it. First of all, you talk to an investor, they're like, it has to be a venture with AI. Fine, that's okay. But the excitement is good because that means it's going to grow and we're going to see more possibilities and we're going to see more real cases coming out of this of how it can actually be used. Yeah, we don't know at this point what the possibilities are, and we look forward to seeing that.
That's really important. I think you're absolutely right. I think John was really ahead of the curve, truly, but I don't think many of us were thinking of LLMs. I think that's the time. If people are interested in the application, one of the LLMs I've written about is called Dave AI. You can look it up. It's a cancer large language model, and it allows people who have been diagnosed with cancer to communicate with an expert, an analytic expert at their level, and ask hundreds and hundreds of questions before after they see the doctor, before they see the doctor. And it is just an amazing application of how we can harness information and a platform like that in order to help people at least feel they have some parity with their physician team. I can't imagine a doctor's, by the way, and Gaye knows that she lives in the Mass General Brigham. I can't imagine a doctor, even with a patient with a serious condition, spending 45 minutes to an hour just answering questions on a newly diagnosed patient. That's the beauty of LLMs. So I thank you for that, Sarah. And Lawrence, along the lines of what Sara was talking about, I want to shift this a little bit, and because I think you're interacting with the other side of the table. Gaye is inside the system. John, in a way, is sparking, or he's disrupting people's thinking around the world as he travels. Sara is harnessing the data into a form that we can digest. And you're sitting there often, if I understand correctly, answering people's questions about not so much the data itself, but what can they get from the data? How can they use the data? What's the value of the data? Could you tell us a little bit about what questions you're being asked by, well, Galen Growth customers in a way, about the data itself, why it's valuable, how do they use it? Is it applicable to their business?
Yeah, and it depends upon what we're talking about within healthcare itself, right? Whether we're talking about pharma, whether we're talking about payers, whether we're talking about health systems, and how they may use the data or the platform behind the data, right? The Health Tech Alpha platform. Yeah, I get asked a lot of questions like that. You take a look at health systems alone, right? So they want to know what's going on within the space, who's partnering with who, in terms of that, what they're looking at in technology. We've talked a lot about AI and large language models from a patient perspective and how they would interact with that for diagnosis or for treatment plans and that type of stuff. But there's more practical applications I see going on within the health systems, as Gaye was talking about or touched upon, within the operations. You take a look at ambient listening technology that they're using with AI to actually complete the medical record at the time of encounter and stuff like that. They're using it in revenue cycle management for coding and those type of things. And those operational things, there's a real ROI for them there. So I think that's probably the first place that a lot of health systems are looking at to engage with that type of technology. And then I see we may move more, we'd probably move more and more towards the other thing once people are comfortable with it. And the other technologies have proved out more, right? Have been more advanced. Even within the health systems, you have all that data that's siloed that needs to be pulled together to be able to be used in terms of treating patients and that type of stuff and analyzing that type of data. So from a customer perspective, if you're looking at health systems that we're looking at, who should we partner with, who should we invest in, right? Where is everybody going? What is Brigham doing? What is Mayo Clinic doing when it comes to that type of stuff?
This is interesting. I mean, Gaye, from your perspective, here you are, you're sitting on top of this, one of two venture funds at Mass General Brigham. And I'm just curious, do you go out into the system itself and sit down with the clinicians and listen to them about whether it's workflow or concerns they have or needs they have? How do you make the decision of what the prioritization is going to be? I would imagine, based on my own experience with some of the companies out there that are in the sector, the digital health companies themselves, you must be contacted by 20, 30 companies a week, if not each day. So how do you prioritize what you're looking for and where you're willing to make your time and money investment?
Yeah, I think that we, more than going, as much as I would love to spend time with our clinicians, it's less of spending time interviewing our clinicians on the front line, and it's much more of interacting with our leadership, our major service line leaders, and especially our digital organization. And I think that particularly for the entrepreneurs out there, one of the other changes that I think has occurred in the last 4 years has been more and more challenging economics for the health systems that has required them to really move away from point solutions and work towards and evaluate solutions that will fit into their digital architecture. And that's just a really important. So when we sort of think about how is the health system, so I look at a company and I say, okay, are they going to be competing with the capabilities of one of the large partners that we've already set up with? And if they are, then it's just not going to get traction here, because we can't afford to have competing solutions with a lot of point solutions. So that's sort of one category that I think about. And then I think about, well, where are the tailwinds in the sector overall? And how do those shape our strategies? And so, I touched on the challenges that our primary care service line is under. And so that has given rise to our health system looking for ways to address, provide the patient care and the quality of care that frankly, our payers demand from us and we want to give, but how do we do that cost effectively? And then how do we do that in a way that we're not glomming together multiple point solutions? Another big trend that, is we're capacity constrained here in Massachusetts. We've been running at 100% for way too long. It leads to the burnout. One of our major strategies here is to dramatically increase our acute home hospital program. We want to go from, I think we were at 20 beds 2 years ago. The goal here is to get to north of 200 beds within the next 18 months to 24 months. That really kicks off a huge amount of need. So if someone has a solution that might work and fit within our partnership with Best Buy in that sector, then I'm more interested. So I really sort of am doing a push and a pull. What are the tailwinds and the sort of secular trends that are going to shape where I think our health system is going, but then really listening carefully to what are on our, what's on our strategic scorecard for the health system as a whole. So we want to drive down the number of our patients who have uncontrolled hypertension, and we want to address our make sure that it's done in an equitable way. And so sort of staying close to the leadership that are taking those decisions and understanding, what is the appetite for taking on digital solutions. And then when I look at the digital solution, it's really, will it pencil out for the health system? How hard of an implementation is it going to take? How many digital resources will it take to stand up and maintain? Or are they architecting their solution so that it's a very light lift for our health system, right? So those are sort of some, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, you
but those
are.
are some of the considerations that we look at. So it's not I'm not mining the sort of front lines for ideas because we are such a large organization. It's more trying to identify where are we going from a strategic perspective and what will really work and be able to be digested by the health system. And it's really a partnership with our digital team. We've recently stood up a new group that is charged with piloting emerging technologies, and we'll be working more and more closely with them as well.
It's a bit more complex. I think that some of the people in the category, the digital health category, would imagine in that sense. It's business decisions operated strategically and operationally. Very good insights for the listeners. John, I want to take what Gaye said and sort of plumb a minor question from you, which is you're traveling all around the world right now. You're invited by companies in Eastern Europe, in Venice. I think you've been to Venice. I think you've been to Warsaw. I know that you're bouncing in and out of
Australia next week.
Australia next week. So you're covering the globe, talking about the category, invited in to shake people up, shake their thinking up. When I'm not going to ask you about your next speech because I know people are paying big money for that, and rightly so. But I'd like to ask you an interesting question, which is after the speech is over and people are sort of like raising their hands with questions, what sort of questions are you getting from the audience?
I get one question all the time, and I think it's really interesting, and I'm sure everyone here is going to nod their head. What do we do? And what we seem to misinterpret is the I word. We often talk about innovation. We need to be innovative. We need to be innovative. But in many instances, what we really need to do is implement. We need to actually figure out how the heck can we take an LLM, or how can we take a simple tool like the AliveCore EKG machine and use it in clinical practice. So it's really the implementation that people struggle with oftentimes, particularly in countries where the economics don't support a 6 Tesla MRI machine, but they can certainly support telemedicine to expand access to care for patients with congestive heart failure. So for me, we often live in this ethereal world of wonder, where AI is going to be the thinking machine and it's very sexy, but how can I use it in my practice? And so that's number one. I is not always innovate, it's implement. And that implementation means, how can I use it? How can I fit it into my clinical workflow? How can I show data to support that it actually works? And finally, and I think this is part of that to complete circle, is don't hit a home run. You don't have to. Get on first. Show some simple utility so that physicians say, wow, this technology was helpful to me. So the adoption sequence is not all or nothing. So that's the big takeaway for me. It's implementation. How can I begin to use these? How can I begin to be comfortable with some of these tools that violate the fundamental obstacle of medicine? And that's the phrase, it's not the way I was trained. That's a real problem, because when I want to evaluate a nodule for a person who's 6 months post-chemotherapy, I'm using a CAT scan because that's the way I was trained. But technology may support the use of a tomosynthesis or other imaging modalities augmented by AI. So again, that's kind of the other story. So it's innovate, but implement, get on base, and get physicians and technicians and clinicians comfortable with modalities that violate the not the way I was trained. And boy, that rings loudly at the MGH and the Brigham and Hopkins and all sorts of places.
I always say that that the people in the field, sort of like in the on the bench, they invent. Innovation is when the market embraces. You can know.
Yeah.
I have an Apple Newton. It was a great invention by John Scully. Nobody bought it. It wasn't a great innovation. So I think to your point and Gay's point, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from those people who are jumping into the field. Sara, I want to take something that Lauren said and Gaye just said and ask you your opinion. A few years ago, I think that a lot of the investment work that you were doing, others were doing, when I look at where the numbers were coming in, the investments, it was private equity, a lot of private equity. Some pharmaceutical companies had venture funds or incubators, and they were doing it as well. I'm wondering, based on what we've heard from Gaye and John right now, and Lawrence just mentioned this, is the tide shifting based upon the data trend? Are hospital systems becoming the new home base for the category, more so than straight private equity? Is that something that we can see from the data?
That's a very good question, because there is definitely an uptick, what we've seen about health systems, hospitals working together to invest. I mentioned that before, and in our health systems report, which we published this past March, we update every year. You can see that those health systems are really getting into making almost as many investments as some of the top investors in the U.S. I mean, we're talking about General Catalyst and the top ones. They're not to that level yet, but they're about, let's say, 70% there, right? The number of investments they make. And that's going to start, it has already started realizing this ecosystem effect. And getting back to what Gaye was talking about, that ecosystem, ventures have to understand that they're part of an ecosystem, right? They can't be point solutions anymore. And there's been an incredible learning effect, right? John talked about implementing, right? You have to get in there, you have to implement it.
Yeah.
And all of those learnings are coming together. And we've seen, unfortunately, those learnings have led to a lot of bankruptcy, a lot of ventures being sold off over the past year, right? H1 and 96 M&A transactions total. You look at Achille, you look at Better Therapeutics, right? What are they realizing? They're realizing that their solutions just aren't fitting into the implementation is not as easy as they thought it would be. It's not fitting into the ecosystem, right? And this is making the ecosystem stronger. We're learning from it. Other ventures are able to acquire the assets, build a more complete product that's going to come to Gaye and then say, hey, look, this is no longer a point solution. We have something that you can actually implement and cover a home healthcare. It's a home healthcare solution. It's not just an EKG for at home, right? It's this whole solution. So that's what we're really excited about, and we talked about that last year as well. The financial crisis that we've seen, now we've seen a little bit of relief, but it's a good thing, right? It's helped to build the ecosystem. We're strengthening the ecosystem, and in the end, we're going to have something better from it.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Now, Lawrence, I'm wondering, you mentioned this was new for me because I think everybody always thinks of Galen growth reports, the depth and expansive nature of the reports as sort of like the product of the venture capital private equity world and maybe the biopharmaceutical industry. But what's become clear to me more and more is as health systems like, Mass General Brigham and many others, I think Sheba Medical has established a global incubator system all around the world. I mean, hospital systems are leaping into this. So when they're speaking to you about the reports themselves, would you share with us why they tell you they're interested in the data? Because I think from the answer of your question, we're going to find out in a way what's keeping them up at night, or what's sort of like making them lick their chops.
Yeah, I mean, from a health system perspective, again, it's we talked about implementation and stuff like that, which is very important. What solutions are being implemented? Who's partnering with who? When I'm looking to solve a certain pain point within my health system, who do I look at? It's not just a venture that knocked on my door, right? Because there's a bunch of ventures that may fit that bill, right? It's going to solve that pain point for you. Well, you want to partner with one that's going to survive, or one that's going to show you maybe an ROI quicker. So you want to answer all those type of questions that you would do when you're doing your due diligence when you're going to partner with somebody to solve a pain point. So those are the types of things that I hear. Who should I look at? What would I look at to solve this pain point? Or who's doing what within the health system, the different health systems to solve these type of issues.
Thank you. We only have, it's hard to believe, we sort of like have zoomed through this hour together. And so I want to ask each of you a last question. I think of the famous movie, The Graduate, where, obviously Dustin Hoffman is a newly minted graduate from, I guess, Bachelor's of Science. And he's at his graduation party, and a relative, an uncle, calls him over and he says, "Benjamin, I want you to remember one word." What was the one word, John? Do you remember?
Plastics.
Plastics, yes. Obviously, they're all in our system right now.
Microplastics.
Microplastics. Microplastics. So that's obviously where we created this huge environmental issue from the movie The Graduate. That's not true. But I didn't want to ask you each for one word, but I did want to ask you for a one sentence or two that our listeners should think about when they think about the category of digital health. Obviously, it's alive and well. I think we've answered that with a resounding absolutely. I think Gaye started us off in that thinking. So we've already answered that question. We've already answered the fact that the evolution of cognitive technologies is actually giving the category greater and greater value. We've talked about the fact that if you don't know where you want to go, any road will take you there. These ventures that really didn't have a clear business model and purpose kind of fell by the wayside. We've resolved that. But I want to ask you a very key question to answer in a sentence or two. For people who will be listening to this conversation in a month or two, what is your advice to them in terms of their attachment to the health ecosystem and this category specifically, from your perspective, from the vantage point that you're charged with? If you were to say, let me tell you, and fill in the sentence, one or two sentences. Gaye, I'm going to put you on the spot, but you really know your stuff. John's like, for the first time. You know your stuff. You're in the trenches. You're making the big decisions. You're in charge of the fund. What are the one or two sentences you would advise our listeners?
I think that recall that this is a multi-stakeholder purchase, and you need to think about how are you going to develop the data that addresses the requirements of each of those stakeholders to really grow across the health system. So that means that, yes, absolutely, we need if it's clinically facing, you need clinical outcomes, but you also need to be able to demonstrate with data how you're going to affect the provider's life, but also the ROI of the health system or whoever the provider is. And so you need to balance the investment on getting those disparate data sets together. Don't do them sequentially. I've seen a lot of companies that go out and get just the clinical data, don't collect the outcomes necessary to be able to demonstrate the ROI. And then they find that they are short on cash and they don't have the outcomes data to actually sell the payer on the,
That's
on the
brilliant.
solution.
Brilliant.
Thanks.
Thank you. Brilliant advice. John, 1 or 2 sentences. People hear you 2 months from now. What's your counsel?
Please don't underestimate the power and value of this moment. Stephen Jay Gould, famous professor at Harvard, talked about punctuated equilibrium. He said that in the world of change, nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens, and then an asteroid hits the Earth and the dinosaurs die. I believe we are at that point in human history now. Gutenberg did it with words, movable type. Google did it with facts. Large language models do it with thoughts. We are unlocking the power of thought, and there is no greater place than in clinical medicine, where the power of thought is the very essence of the act that saves lives. That's where we are today.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sara, what are your 2 sentences of advice?
I would absolutely say there's no turning back now. Digital health has integrated itself. We're not going to go back and live without it. So look forward. Bring the data is mounting. We track data. You can see that year on year, month on month, the data is growing, right? To show the value. And LLM is a big but growing piece of that, right? Keep going forward. No, this is the future, and we have to have survivors and we have to have victims. Right? The investment will continue. Remain optimistic, and let's keep going.
Brilliant.
There's no turning back.
Great.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Lawrence just, by the way, sent me a personal chat. I hope he doesn't mind my mentioning it. He said, Gaye, John, and Sara stole all the things I was going to say. But Lawrence, but please, you're an innovative guy. What were you going to say?
No, mine would be knowledge is key to making good business decisions. So read the reports, understand what's going on in the ecosystem so you can make those great business decisions, right? And I will tether that onto Sara, who can give us a brief look at what's coming in terms of the reports that
Sara,
are
do you
going to be
mind telling
released
us
next
what's
week.
up? Do you want to tell us what's happening next week? Since I didn't get my embargoed copy yet.
You will be getting those shortly, Gil.
Okay.
Absolutely. Next week, we look forward to releasing our half-year reports on the 3 major digital health ecosystems: Asia Pacific, the US, as well as Europe. And that will be followed. We can even look further into the future than next week.
I'm looking forward to my preview. Please, please. Thank you for that. First of all, I want to thank our audience. They have stayed true. It's a pleasure to know that everybody has remained with us for the full hour. Gaye, thank you so much for bringing yourself, your knowledge, the experience that you have from Mass General Brigham into the conversation. John, in between your airport runs, next stop Australia, it's Sydney or Melbourne?
Melbourne, first time.
Melbourne, beautiful city. You'll enjoy. Thank you for treating us a little bit as your United Club for a few moments. Thank you very much. Sara, I want to congratulate you on an incredible report. I have devoured this and read it quite a few times, and it's a pleasure for me to get these reports and write about them. Lawrence, thank you for making this conversation possible and for all the work you do in making sure that the reports are available. And in this case, the H1, the first half of the year report, I believe is still available as a free download on your website or in my article in Medical Life. Thank you all for joining us today in conversation, and I look forward to future conversations together. Thank you all, everyone.
Thank you, Gil.
Thank you for including me.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.